Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the final webinar in the Perfect Storm of Extraction, Poverty, and Climate Change webinar series. This is Community-Created Solutions to the Perfect Storm. My name is Taylor Ward, she, her, and I am the Senior Manager of Communications and Education at Just Solutions. For those who don't know, Just Solutions is a BIPOC-led national climate organization that partners with communities who are disproportionately impacted by climate change to turn their priorities and ideas into laws and policies. We are broadening and deepening the understanding of equitable and effective policies and projects, and are fostering a national community of peer learning for Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and frontline community-based organizations to elevate their solutions and replicate them across the country, sorry. Thank you all for joining us today. And so you can feel free to add your name, your organization, and where you're located in the chat so everyone else knows who else is on the call today. We will also be live tweeting this event, so feel free to follow along with us on Twitter. Our @name is @just_solutions_, or you can use the hashtag community-created-solutions to share your thoughts. Awesome. And so let's see, next slide. So the purpose of today's webinar, too quick. The purpose of today's webinar is to improve the understanding of the real-world economic health and infrastructure conditions that constrain the capacity of frontline communities to cope with, prepare for, and respond to climate change. We will learn about innovative community-created practices being implemented in some of the communities that were profiled in our report and that are fostering adaptive capacity and resilience. The agenda for today's event includes introductions of today's speakers, a presentation of the key findings of the Perfect Storm report, and presentations from our guest panelists. We will also end with an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout today's event, please feel free to use the Q&A chat box, and we'll get to them at that time. So to introduce the authors of the report, the authors of the Perfect Storm are Zuli Juarez, Senior Research and Policy Analyst with Just Solutions, where she works to identify research and analyze existing environmental policies, practices, procedures, and laws, as well as Jennifer Moon, a research consultant with Moonlight Solutions. Jennifer has over 20 years of experience in social services and public health, serving as a researcher, analyst, and communicator. Our first featured partner organization is the Blackfeet Environmental Office of the Blackfeet Nation. The Blackfeet Environmental Office in Montana protects the Blackfeet Nation's natural resources. It preserves and enhances the environment at the Blackfeet Reservation and carries out environmental stewardship through the development and implementation of environmental policies and regulation. In 2018, the Blackfeet Nation began working on the Climate Change Adaptation Plan to protect the local ecosystem from the effects of climate change. Grounded in traditional values and a collective community vision, the plan is a living document to guide future work and research. And our guest panelist for today is Tremaine Edmo. Tremaine Edmo is a member of the Blackfeet Nation and Shoshone Bancock of Fort Hall, Idaho. She's a graduate of Blackfeet Community College and a student at the University of Montana. At the University of Montana, she participated in a USDA internship program that led to her work on the Blackfeet Climate Change Adaptation Plan. In addition to her work at the Blackfeet Environmental Office, she also serves as a cultural youth mentor, sharing Blackfeet language, ceremonies, and traditional ecological knowledge. Our second featured partner organization is Groundwork Bridgeport. Based on a model in England, Groundwork Bridgeport has served Bridgeport, Connecticut since 1998. It is a local community-based nonprofit with the mission of bringing about the sustained regeneration, improvement, and management of the physical environment by empowering people, businesses, and organizations to promote environmental, economic, and social well-being. Through education, community service, and other programming, it is improving the quality of life of marginalized communities. Our guest speaker from Bridgeport is Christina Smith. Christina was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and lived there until she was 12. She has returned as an adult to make and works on a daily basis to make her hometown better. Christina has a BA in economics from Princeton University, an MSc in urban regeneration from the University College London, and an MA in historical and sustainable architecture from New York University. With experience in how to better cities and reuse old buildings for new purposes, Christina applies her knowledge to her hometown with the goal of making Bridgeport a place where people love to be. And our third featured partner organization is Make the Road Nevada. Make the Road Nevada is a nonprofit organization based in Las Vegas, Nevada. Based on similar models for organizing immigrant communities in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, Make the Road Nevada is building a strong grassroots foundation in Las Vegas and is elevating the power of working class immigrant communities across the state. Our featured speaker is Jose Rivera. Jose was born in Mexico and immigrated to the United States at the age of 1 in his parents' arms. He grew up in Fontana, California, and later moved to Las Vegas, where he currently resides. Jose is a DACA recipient and has a passion for immigrant, LGBTQ+, POC, and youth rights. And he has been recently focusing on advocating for climate justice in the areas that affect families most. He is also a student at the College of Southern Nevada, majoring in elementary education with the hopes of empowering youth to become involved in the fight. And with that, I will turn it over to Zuli to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Taylor. We're going to highlight a few of the key findings from our report today and then turn it over to our panelists to hear about the innovative work they are doing in their communities to address climate change and foster resilience. Just to start us off with some context, as we know, BIPOC and frontline communities bear the disproportionate burden of environmental and climate impacts. And through a variety of studies and mapping efforts, we can identify those communities at greater risk and the many factors that put them at risk. But we are less successful at communicating causal relationships or how these conditions come to be and how they are perpetuated through policymaking. So in our report, we used a case study approach to examine what we called pre-existing conditions in 6 frontline communities. These conditions affect the capacity of residents to cope with, prepare for, and respond to climate change. So we looked at 3 domains: economic, health, infrastructure, and infrastructure conditions. And we wanted to go beyond the threats that come from climate disasters to also examine the ability to cope with current challenges associated with climate change. And that includes everything from the ability to pay for increasing heating and cooling costs to improving urban planning to really ensure that residents can escape or mitigate heat by having the benefit of like tree canopies or other features that can provide relief on an everyday basis. So our goal with this was to communicate the real world conditions across these communities and to develop a framework for examining adaptive capacity and resilience as these communities and other like them across the country confront climate change. And we invite everyone to view the full report at the bit.ly address shown here on the slide to learn more about the 6 communities we profiled and the current conditions and challenges they face in preparing and responding to climate change. So this is a series. So our first webinar of our series took place in July and it focused on economic conditions. In August, we hosted a webinar and it looked at health and infrastructure conditions. And today we're highlighting community created solutions. And you can access our first 2 webinars also on the address on the slide. Next slide. We'll also make sure to share the links at the end of the presentation. Perfect. So the communities profiled were selected for their geographic diversity. They are a mix of rural and urban areas spread across the country. Most of them are counties, but 2, which include the east end of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and East Las Vegas, Nevada, are zip codes in urban areas. And the profile communities share several characteristics in common. They are very low income with high levels of poverty. In each of these communities, 25% or more of their population lived in poverty in 2020, as defined by the federal poverty guidelines. So the conditions in these communities are among the most challenging in the country. They were selected based on the premise that improved outcomes in these communities will reflect positive policy changes benefiting frontline communities generally. They all have majority BIPOC populations, except for McDowell County, West Virginia. McDowell County, however, is one of the most diverse counties in West Virginia. It has one of the state's few Black majority towns. They all have significant histories of resource extraction, labor exploitation, or financial speculation. So as described in the paper, their current conditions are the result of past policies and exploitive practices that have left these communities behind. And lastly, despite these histories, these communities have demonstrated resilience and innovation, despite continuing trends of neglect and oppression. Next slide. So we conducted interviews with representatives of each of these communities profiled, and their voices are highlighted throughout the report. In some cases, residents spoke about the assets, challenges, and innovative practices in their communities. And in others, those who work closely in the profile communities share their understanding of local conditions. Those we interviewed validated the conditions that we saw in the data and presented compelling evidence of the real life conditions, community strength, and also resilience, and what will be needed to improve community outcomes in general. Next slide. We'll briefly review each of the factors that we saw. So as I mentioned, these communities have all experienced exploitation of labor and or resource, followed by various forms of divestment. So in several cases, investments were made in order to extract economic gains. So when resources were expended, the communities and their residents fell into decline. For example, in Hidalgo County, Texas, industrial waste now presents significant health hazards and jeopardizes safety if a climate disaster were to strike. In the Black majority community of Keystone in McDowell County, West Virginia, they were under a boil water notice for 10 years because of abandoned infrastructure left behind by mining companies. So a combination of economic factors described in the report is limiting the ability of these communities to cope with, prepare for, and respond to climate change and transition to the clean energy economy. Next slide. These communities also face significant health challenges. Healthcare access affects both current health outcomes and the ability of residents to recover from climate disasters. Poor health puts people at higher risk of extreme heat and complicates the treatment of many chronic conditions. In the report, we focus especially on those chronic conditions such as diabetes, kidney disease, and COPD that often require a steady power supply for their treatment. Certain medications used in the treatment of these conditions require refrigeration, and if residents lose power, it can be life-threatening. Preterm birth rates, which tend to be higher in these communities, are also associated with higher rates of asthma, and asthma can be affected by poor air quality that comes with extreme heat or increasing wildfire risk. Next slide. Now for infrastructure, the quality of housing stock in many of these communities is poor, and conditions have grown worse as a result of flooding or other effects of climate change. So when residents lack the economic resources to make needed repairs, the housing quality deteriorates further. So with both economic and health consequences. And these communities also face risks from outdated or insufficient infrastructure, such as sewage and water systems, as well as exposure to industrial pollutants that pose significant health and safety challenges. So some of these communities also regularly experience urban inferno effects that are the result of a combination of poor air quality and a lack of tree canopy as well. Next slide. So why it matters. At all of the indicators we examined together, we describe the real challenges these communities face in our report. These are just few of the impacts these conditions have on residents. Inadequate income combined with rising costs exposes residents to difficulty paying everyday expenses, as well as the increased burdens that come with climate change. So with health impacts, they are significant for residents who are already living with higher rates of chronic conditions and other health challenges. And they are likely to become greater as a result of climate disaster, as well as worsening economic stressors. As for infrastructure, it leaves them at a disadvantage in responding to climate change generally and to climate disasters in particular. So in taking steps to adapt to climate change, such as through home weatherization. They face increased risk of death or illness from blackouts or shutoffs, exposures to environmental toxins, floods, and exposure to extreme heat or cold. And they are less likely to benefit from things like weatherization, or in some cases, even FEMA relief, as explored in the report. Next slide. So some takeaways. Public policy has made these communities what they are. Future policy making will similarly determine whether or not we achieve climate justice and a just transition or not. We would argue that measuring indicators like the one presented today here will help us determine whether policy making is effective or not. And now I'll pass it on to Termaine to share her work with the Blackfeet Environmental Office. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, ni stuni danaku awanaki, nixistanasta a stanski ginstanasta bita wasta, nistu anak ninamska gi sixtaki aki gi ganaxumitak. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today virtually from across our great nation. My name is Tremaine Edmo, and I serve as the climate change coordinator for the Blackfeet tribe. But more importantly, I serve as a cultural youth mentor for our future generations of our Piikani ways of being. And so I was fortunate enough to grow up into our traditional lifestyle, and fortunate enough for my parents to teach me the relationships with the land. And so at a young age, I learned how to care for the land. I learned how to transcribe our well-being into natural practices. So I come from a family of agriculturalists who we are in our 7th generation of kip ranching. So agriculture has always been a part of my culture. So the Blackfeet Nation is located at the right at the foot of Glacier National Park and the border, the Canadian border. We're the 10th largest tribe in the U.S. and one of the only tribes to reside in our ancestral lands. We make up we're one of 4 tribes that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy. Our other 3 tribes are our sister tribes in Canada. If we were to have all of them here, we would probably be one of the largest tribes. So we're really, again, like all tribes, we were really thoughtful in the way we moved through this landscape. Like I said, we were fortunate enough to come from this land base, so we knew we were protectors of the headwaters. Glacier National Park, where we sit, we are at the only 2nd apex in the world, meaning we have a triple divide, and it flows into 3 oceans, 3 natural watersheds. And so a lot of our stories, our ceremonies, we call it our Piikani ways of knowing, they come from this land. So Piikani Native Americans believe that all things are living and all things have a purpose. And our ceremonies, they guide us through these seasons. So we have 2 seasons. We have summer and winter, which we really prepare for, and Native Americans have been first stewards of this land base for time immemorial. So I'm really just continuing to pass on this knowledge that I was fortunate to gain. And so we do live in a rural community. We have 7 outlying communities where the Browning and Blackfeet Nation is the main hub of all 7 communities. And we're about anywhere from 25 to 35 miles apart distance. Like I said, 1.5 million acres, over 51,000 acres of wetlands, over 114,000 acres of grasslands, intact grasslands. And we have over 90% of our original species here. So we have a lot to manage. I like to say we're the Indigenous Glacier National Park, and we're using our traditional knowledge, our traditional ways of being to really foster how we move through this landscape. So in 2018, the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council, esteemed natural resource directors, traditionalists, elders, they all sat down and we start looking over the trends and predictions of the Montana Climate Assessment. And then we start preparing for climate change and how it was impacting us. So we did a series of community meetings to get going, and we really prioritized what natural resources would be, which we would prioritize first, from high risk priority to lowest. And again, the plan consists of 8 sectors: agriculture, culture, fish, forestry, land, range, human health, and water. And in the plan, the first sector we had implemented was the water. Like I said, we're natural water protectors as First Nations people. And we really, each sector has goals and priorities on how to adapt to climate change. And so our first pilot project was the Beaver Mimicry Project, where we naturally store groundwater, recharge surface water for late season drought. and really targeting our agriculture producers. Like I said, we are 1.5 million acres with over 85% agricultural land base. So the tribe does own a lot, majority of their land, but we're tailoring our natural practices to fit everyone's need. So we're really meeting the producer where they're at, and we found that using those methods and low tech practices, we're really gaining headway with moving to a more sustainable land base. And we've been doing this for the past 5 years. So like I said, the beaver mimicry was the first implementation. The snow fencing was the next goal. Regenerative grazing with our cattle and our bison. We do have over 4,000 head of bison here, and over anywhere from 70,000 to 100,000 cattle. So yeah, we almost have more cattle than people here in rural Montana. So like I said, it's been a part of our history. So we're really fit, having our focus tailored to meet our agriculture producer needs. So at the same time, we're also implementing the agricultural resource management plan, again, to get a better hand on our land base, and really what's working for us and how we can better meet the needs of our people in our community. And so it just all spiraled from 2018. It was just like continuous cycle that we kept implementing, kept going with the momentum. You know, we have to get really unique with our funding, of course. You know, like I said, we're the first ones in the state of Montana to actually implement a climate adaptation plan. The tribes here in the state of Montana, there are 8 tribes in the state of Montana here, and we're the only ones working on climate adaptation. Again, First Nations people have been doing this from the beginning of time, and we will continue to use our traditional way of life to really guide us. And so this year we were actually recognized nationally for our work. So we got national recognition for Climate Adaptation Leadership Award. So that was really neat. And then we have the again, we're just going with momentum, going with what grants we can, and really, you know, fostering our funds. And again, I work with a nonprofit organization, so I also work with the tribe and a nonprofit organizations to see this plan through. So we're making sure this plan is a living document. The Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan is a living document that will be here and guide us, and will continue to update. And we're just going to continue to keep on thriving. You know, we've been impacted again from the beginning of time, and we rolled with it. We know how to adapt. We are teaching. We are open to best practices and solutions. What's working for us? You know, it's not a cookie cutter approach, but you know, we are open to sharing our experiences and what is working for us, what may work for you. And how we're really assessing drought right now. You know, droughts are hot topic right now. You know, we've been in 30 years of drought, and so right now we're working with trying to get meet those needs of our producers, like I said, and getting them monitoring weather stations, so they can have a better hang on, you know, our hangups because we can't be everywhere in the 1.5 million acres. So again, meeting them where they're at and working with them, bringing the science to their door, and really living in balance, really, and honoring our 2-legged, our 4-legged, our winged, and our finned brothers, because they're the ones who gave us this ability to naturally coexist with them. So we believe it's our honor to give that reciprocity back. And that is the way we're moving through the Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan, keeping culture, language, and our Piikani ways of knowing in the forefront. And yeah, we also became the first tribal community to be Tree City of the World. This guy up here, so that's our Beaver Mimicry Award that we got, the Montana Watershed. I didn't even go through my slides. Can you pull my slides up? I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's the Beaver Mimicry. The Beaver Mimicry was awarded in 2018. Tree City. We first became a Tree City, Tree City USA. We're first tribal community to be Tree City USA. And then with that, they took my Indigenous framework for a cultural workshop with trees, and then they asked me to apply for Tree City of the World. So like I said, we have 3 sister tribes in Canada that we're working with internationally on a guardianship program to foster one of our
Oh, you're muted, Tareen.
Oh my God, did you hear any of that?
Yes, we did. You just muted for like half a second.
Okay, so right here, what you're looking at is Chief Mountain, and Chief Mountain is one of our most sacred sites. And again, it's monumental, and we're bringing, like I said, we're bringing culture, we're bringing language, we're bringing our stories back. And what we're doing is we're entwining all of this knowledge into our youth and into our people, because as First Nations people, we believe without our language, without our culture, we're not balanced. So with that balance comes all the work after, right? So we're the keystones to give back that reciprocity, and so it's really a respectable relationship in how we're moving through our land base. And so again, that's one of our most sacred sites, and we will continue to foster it. We put a medicine wheel there this year during our annual Buffalo Days, where we harvest buffalo. Again, we're using traditional harvesting as one of our soil amendment techniques to again, bring our culture back and use low-tech sustainable methods. And next slide, please. And again, this is me. I lead cultural youth. I do land-based workshops, and so here's me guiding a group up to Chief Mountain. So this is the base of Chief Mountain, and we're actually doing a plant identification. So we just got done picking a lot of really medicinal traditional plants that our students from 9 through 12 had learned about. And it was just really an amazing time. That for me, that's my giving back, because I grew up knowing this. So it's my obligation to give this knowledge back so we can have a continuance of traditional mentors. And so right here, like I said, is the awards, kind of a little breakdown of the awards. 2018, the Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan had published, implemented. 2021, we were awarded for our work. 22, we had Tree City USA. 23, the beginning of this year, we were awarded Tree City of the World. And like I said, these, you could go to the next slide. These practices all really complement each other. So again, this is our Tree City. The first picture is our Tree City. We're doing stream bank restoration, soil enhancements, and the middle picture is our beaver mimicry, again, where we're naturally building beaver dams to naturally store water, recharge groundwater, etc., especially in this drought. And then the last picture is our newest practice, and we are actually introducing fire back to the landscape. So I always like to tell the story of how the Blackfeet got their names by colonizers who had seen us doing 1,000-year-old practice, not even thousands, a traditional practice that has been with us for countless generations. And so part of that is regenerating the land for the buffalo, right? And so that's why we have the largest intact grasslands, is because of our buffalo. So we really honor our buffalo. In my introduction, I'm a part of the Buffalo Policing Pipes Society. So it's my obligation to teach how we coexist, and again, how that relationship fosters not only our mental well-being, but also the mental and the ecology of the entire ecosystem. And so that is, again, our natural practices that we are traditionally implementing with the help of the youth, the help of our tribe, and really the help of these grants that are, 2-3 year funding cycles that really, they're a nice start, but we could have continuing funding, how it could really impact rural communities, because we do feel the most effects of climate change. We're 120 miles away from any mall, any Walmart, any large really shopping area. So we know the effects of isolation and climate deprivation, and so we really we're resilient, and we will continue to be here for countless generations, for my children's children and their children, so they can continue to steward this landscape. Again.
Thank you so much. And we will now pass it on to Christina.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to do a quick time check to make sure I stay on time. Until what time do I have?
You can take 10 minutes. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. As introduced, my name is Christina Smith. I'm the CEO of Groundwork Bridgeport, which is a small community-based, or rather a local community-based organization. Actually, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Located in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So as stated earlier, the model is based off of a model that originally started in the UK, and that still does exist. The goal of the organization, and most of the organizations are located in post-industrial areas where there used to be large industry, and then it left, leaving blight and contamination. So we have this long mission here, which we still share with Groundwork in the UK. But long story short, our goal is to revitalize the community holistically. But the main focus was on, and still is on, brownfield revitalization for a number of the groundworks that are operating in the US, as well as the UK. Next slide, please. So Bridgeport, it's a coastal community, which I wanted to highlight because, of our talk here on resiliency. It's a small community, so it's only 16 square miles, even though it is the most populous community or town in Connecticut, with approximately 148,000 people, which is on the next slide as well. And also, if anyone's familiar with the Northeast, we have all 4 seasons. It straddles a, subtropical climate. We have, relatively long summers and cold winters, which I bring up again as it relates to climate change and resiliency. Next slide. So demographics, again, I went over most populous city in Connecticut. We have an approximately equal numbers of Black, Hispanic, and white population, although I think most of the time when people think of Bridgeport, they think of the Black and Hispanic population. I actually just learned this the other day, but I put it in the slide because I thought it was interesting. But there are apparently or approximately 92 languages spoken as primary languages in the schools in Bridgeport, which speaks to the diversity of the students and population here. And almost half of the population speaks a different primary language at home, most of which is Spanish. Next slide. So some of the challenges here in terms of our work, which I'll discuss more on the next slide, are the politics of the city. We have had a number of political kind of scandals and corruption, and actually are currently going through one. Our current mayor was our former mayor some years ago before going to prison for racketeering and some other issues, but he's now currently the mayor, and we've recently just had another scandal in terms of absentee ballots fraud. And the reason this poses a challenge is because we work a lot with the city, but when there are issues like this, it distracts from working towards revitalizing the community, and in particular economic development, which the city needs. But people are less likely to invest because of these issues. In terms of the economy, so the poverty rate is 22%, so much higher than the overall 10% in Connecticut. The median household income is $46,000 compared to Connecticut's one of our richest states, so $78,000 overall, and we're actually in one of the richest counties, I would say, in the US, where the median household income is, I guess, more than double what it is for Bridgeport itself. And 53% of Bridgeport's households are cost burdened, meaning they spend at least 30% of their total income on housing costs. And again, that goes back to climate resiliency in terms of thinking about energy burden. You know, as the temperatures are getting hotter and the cost of cooling and keeping cool in the home, it becomes a bigger and bigger issue as time goes on. The next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and I just wanted to briefly go over some of the programs that we're working on towards revitalizing our community. So we have our service learning program, which I consider our youth civic engagement program, where we work with high school students from the city, from all of the high schools here, to participate in a program that takes them through 8 weeks of training, where they're learning about basically how to improve their community. And realistically, it's the students that come up in groups with ideas for how they would like to improve their community, and we're supporting them with the knowledge on how to do so. The next big thing that we focus on is tree programming, or more formally, urban forestry. We just received, through the Inflation Reduction Act funding, a $1.7 million grant, which was just announced 2 weeks ago, and that's to focus on studying the impacts and benefits of trees in the city, including our tree plantings that we have been doing over the years. So that is going to be a data science-based project working with the University of Chicago to really understand not only the impacts of trees, but understand urban heat island and how trees are helping with that, understanding social determinants of health, and pulling all sorts of data from the census and other databases and information to understand the impacts of climate change on our community. We'll also be working with the NASA Develop team starting in January, who will also be using satellite data that NASA collects from above the Earth observation data, to understand urban heat islands, land cover, and other issues in the city, all related to kind of resiliency and climate change. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the primary mission of the organization, or impetus for starting groundwork in the UK and then here in the US, was about brownfield revitalization. So every groundwork in the US is actually funded in part by the city itself, that is going into the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's brownfield department, as well as the National Park Service, RTCA, which I always forget the acronym. I believe it's Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program, to focus on brownfield revitalization. So as a small organization, meaning we are only a staff of 3, and I was hired to rebuild this organization some years ago, we haven't been heavily involved in doing that. However, with a grant that we received for climate resilience just about a year and a half ago, our goal is to build up our knowledge and expertise in how to revitalize brownfield land. We are partnering with another entity to revitalize a 3-acre site in downtown Bridgeport, kind of as a third space or tertiary space for resilience towards climate change and urban heat islands. So tertiary space meaning not home or work, but an additional space. So we'll be turning this space into a park space, essentially a green space, using a lot of green infrastructure to deal with the various issues. So, but putting trees on there to make it cooler, dealing with the regular tidal flooding that comes to the sites, as well as making an educational space to support kind of like, the full ecosystem, both humans and other animals, since we are animals alike. And another thing I just related to kind of the revitalization is some work or a grant that we received on air quality. So this goes back to kind of our urban forestry. So we received a grant to install 48 air monitors in the city to understand the impacts, again, of climate change on air quality and how trees can help with mitigating that, and also to direct where we should be targeting our tree plantings, because we do have a high asthma rate in the city. I think it's the highest in the state. But overall, those are kind of our 3 main focus areas: youth civic engagement, brownfield revitalization, and urban forestry. So I look forward to answering any questions that anyone has at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Next, we'll hear from Jose.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me here. My name is Jose Rivera. I am the Environmental Justice Organizer with Make the Road Nevada. And I will be talking to you about our route to environmental justice. Next slide, please. Make the Road Nevada is a nonprofit organization based in Las Vegas, Nevada. Our family of organizations hail from the East Coast, where we have changed the face of community organizing in immigrant communities. The states of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania are sister organizations that we have in the East Coast, and we're working our way with expanding throughout the West Coast. We just recently opened up our offices up in Reno, and we will soon be headed to the little sub-cities around the state. Next slide, please. Our Las Vegas our Las Vegas office sits in one of the Valley's largest urban heat islands, which has given the organization an opportunity to hold conversations with the community on the heat effects regarding her urban heat islands. So East Las Vegas tends to be around 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And this has affected a lot of our community. It has affected our street vendor population. It has affected our youth as well. Next slide, please. So for the environment, we host different types of workshops and events that educate and train the community members about economic development, climate adaptation, and environmental restoration. We hold up workshops regarding urban planning. We let them know what urban planning is. We talk to them about the environmental terms that are constantly being used but never explained in spaces. In the spaces, our community members are invited to. So with the Environmental Justice Committee, we also have the Eros project, which I will talk about in the next slide, but it is a street vendor project that we are currently working on. We host bi-monthly meetings in person and via Zoom. These meetings are held in bilingual languages, English and Spanish, to ensure that we have language access. Next slide, please. Now, talking about the Eros project, in the Spanish language, a corn snack vendor is known as an elotero, ice cream vendor known as paleteros, and a lot of different vendors in the Spanish language. The title ends with Eros. We started having, next slide, please. We started having conversations in 2021 with street vendors across Las Vegas to talk about the heat effects that they were experiencing, because we sat down with members of our community and we discovered, well, that it is known that our street vendor community are out there every single day from early morning hours to late afternoon. I'm experiencing the weather effects, the urban heat island effects. So we would set up one-on-ones with our vendors, and throughout this process, we learned that there was far bigger issues going on. So they were being affected with the health issues when the temperatures were high. Next slide, please. But we also learned, we could actually go to the next slide. We also learned that there was different challenges such as heat strokes that they were experiencing, asthma attacks, constant asthma attacks. There was a lack of green spaces in the areas that they were selling. And next slide, please. This was used as a way to deter street venting throughout Las Vegas. So there was an entity in Las Vegas with local authority that would remove trees from Las Vegas sites where they would see street vendors. And so this would affect both vendors and the local environment. We would see higher temperatures. We see more parking lots than trees usually here in this side, and we see less parks. So we learned that there was bigger issues. Next slide. And because of that, we went all the way to the Capitol. We met with lawmakers. We spoke to lawmakers about the importance of having a pathway to licensing in Nevada, since street vending was considered illegal at the time. The organization started taking testimonials from vendors, from community members who were experiencing local authorities who were discriminating our community's vendors. And so throughout the legislative process, this last legislative process, we were able to get a pathway to licensing for street vending in Nevada. And this is important by keeping the community as part of the solution. Next slide. SB 92 or Senate Bill 92 expanded licensing pathway in Nevada. It created an economic growth for individuals and also for the state of Nevada. It stops criminalizing our community, and it also allows local authorities to focus on more relevant issues. And this allows us to create collaborations and relationships with lawmakers in the future. Next slide, please. So this is just the first step in the right direction, but there is a long way to go. Like I mentioned before, we host a set of different types of workshops and events for our community. And we are going to try to be as inclusive as possible. So if there is an issue regarding a environmental issue, we also understand that there are there's health-related issues as well, immigration-related issues as well. Everything has inclusivity here. So that was my presentation, and it was a nice, a great opportunity to be here today. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you all for those wonderful presentations. We are now going to be moving on to the Q&A portion of the event. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box and we will add those into our questions. And so the first question that we have is one question that we received during the registration process. So we'll start with that one. And this is for all of the speakers. This person wants to know, how do you get your program started and build momentum? They find that it often requires the most amount of effort to get programs off the ground. So if you all want to think of maybe one of the projects that you discussed, and how did it go from an idea to actually getting it moving? And Jose, we can start with you.
Thank you so much. So, like I mentioned previously with the Eros project, we started off having an environmental conversation with street vendors, nothing related to licensing, right? We were actually asking street vendors the heat-related effects, and throughout the process, we just had to lose that fear of having conversations with strangers, showing up to random parking lots and different parks and schools around town where we saw street vendors, just to ask them those questions, And throughout that, we start learning that there's different issues as well that relate with them. So we started to create those relationships. Once you create that trust and those relationships, it makes the job easier because they're going to start reaching out for you. And so once you start training them, educating them on the issue, they're going to start getting very excited and excited to spread that information out to the community. So that was a form of us getting out into the community.
Thank you. And Christina, do you have any insights?
So I'm always starting programs up, and I just do them randomly without thinking. I think often, even if we don't have the funds, if I think an idea is good, it's just kind of throw it at the wall, like, they say to do with spaghetti, and see if it works. We did that on several occasions. The service learning program, frankly, was kind of that thing, right? We had very limited resources when I started. I didn't know how little we had. We had basically $20,000 in the bank account, and full-time people, so trying to figure things out. And it was just always about constantly like pivoting and just trying things out, and for me, it was like not overthinking it, overanalyzing it, and just going forward with it, whether or not there's funding for it. And I think then when it does work, because, you know, nonprofit world is always done again about funding, it's easier to then show, you know, this is what has been accomplished, and then be able to raise funds for that. And again, with our service learning program, you know, just 3 years ago, we got a 3-year grant for $90,000 each year, which was like, you know, more than we, you know, almost need necessarily for our youth programming. So if that is a hesitation from anyone, I just say, you know, if you're in the kind of small environment where you can just go for it, and see what works.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And Tremaine, did you have any insights on that question?
Yes. Yeah, so I the majority of our planning comes from our funding and the funding cycle we're on. And right now we have a huge BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs Tribal Resiliency Grant, and we are going to implement our culture sector. So we have a lot of programs coming down the pipeline, and we just tailor them as we get the funding.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that insight. One question that we just got from the Q&A is, how do you think about green policy solutions when it comes to investing in buildings and communities and avoiding displacement of vulnerable communities? Any insights? Christina or Jose, do you have any thoughts on that one?
So I actually literally just got back yesterday from the Groundwork USA like annual assembly, and I attended a session on anti-displacement. While we didn't come up with solutions, we did talk a lot about kind of, you know, it's like the developers coming in and causing things to go up and causing displacement of people. But, you know, my response was that, you know, we really are in a capitalistic society, and I don't necessarily, it's my personal opinion, and I don't necessarily think that like between capitalism and greed that people are just suddenly going to stop. And it's not to say I don't believe in policy changes and trying to do things, but again, as many have, you know, experienced in the past, policies come and people find ways around it, right? I've heard lots about fraud and like rent control things, or like affordable housing that's going to people with like 6-figure incomes. And so my recent thought, and just reflecting on that, you know, chat yesterday, is there a way to understand that perhaps like displacement is going to be happening more so than we want it to, and how do we help people displace, you know, better in this sense? Like, how do we help them get to those like new areas where they can succeed and deal with the challenge of having to have moved someplace else? I do think we try to stop it in the beginning, but I think we spend so much energy on that part, and not enough of like, okay, this is going to happen, and it's, you know, another developer or whomever, you know, bad actor is going to pop up here and there. Let's not focus so much on like yelling at the developer in this case if nothing is going to happen while the person is like struggling in the meantime. So it's like, how can we make that easier? How can communities make that easier? Because again, it was brought up, and this was a policy to do a community benefits agreement in one community, and it was the city council people that voted it down, because they were like, well, no, we want this development to come in, like we need this income and things. And so it becomes this strange tension. But in the meantime, what happens? So those are my personal like thoughts on it. I don't know about anything abroad, you know, happening, or, you know, across the US, but those are my personal thoughts, is how do we help people once they're displaced?
Thank you for sharing that. And Jose, we have a question for you. What has been effective in persuading government to listen to community perspective and make change, such as the licensing policy in Nevada?
Well, it is not pretty, I will tell you that. It's about losing the fear about having those conversations, right? But it's also about losing the fear of just showing up to their offices, filling the rooms where these meetings are being held, and filling the room with members, giving testimonials out, sharing these stories. Testimonials and stories are have been very helpful in the SB 92 process. Why? Because it creates some type of more familiar environment. And so it wasn't easy. During the legislative process, we would fill buses with members, take them to the Capitol, and have them go through the legislative building and talking to lawmakers why it's important to pass a pathway to licensing. So it's going to take a lot of people, and it's going to take a lot of engagement. But at the end of the day, it's a movement, and it's a growing movement, and we can't back down. We have to keep on going and continue, regardless of the legislative outcome that may happen.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And then Termaine, we have a question for you. Someone says that they were really struck by your use of climate deprivation and wonder if you could share more on that concept. And then to other speakers, if you have any thoughts on the concept of climate deprivation, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, well, I think Native Americans and First Nations people have been deprivated from time and immemorial. So I think we really just got strategic in our planning and the way we move forward with our resiliency. And it leaves a lot of room for us. I mean, we're people of the land. We're people of the land. We know how to be creative, and we know how to work with our land base. And again, we are working with everything we have at our front door. And so, like I said, like we have extreme winters, we have to, we have a lot of health disparities, just because we are so far away from anything. And so, we had a lot of losses. Like I said, we learned a lot, and we got more proactive in the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we interact. And so thinking back to the question that was asked previously of how we're working within policy. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have a climate change sector weaved into every tribal program here on the Blackfeet Nation. So our first response, so our emergency response team, we all have a plan. We're all on the same page. We all know what each other's doing. So this integrated management system really benefits us, and again allows us to not be deprived, right? We don't like to think of ourselves as deprived. We like to think of ourselves as the leaders and the challenge takers, right? To overcome these barriers like we've been doing, and just like a duck, rolling with it.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we are reaching the end of our time. And so I want to thank all of our speakers for joining us today, sharing the insights on your programs, and answering these questions. We will include links to all of your organizations and the works that you're doing in the follow-up materials, as well as a link to the Perfect Storm report and ways to stay connected to all of us here. I did put the post-event survey in the chat, so please feel free to fill that out. Let us know what you thought about today's event and what other events you'd like us to put on as well. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.